They are three key elections that will have geopolitical consequences: Israel, Iran, and Italy. And here now to tell us more about these three key votes, TVO's foreign affairs analyst Janice Stein. Good to have you back in that chair, Professor Stein.
Pleasure, Steve.
It's been a while. Okay, let's begin with the first of the three I's. This one's Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu is back as Israel's prime minister, but with a much reduced seat count. How come?
Well, first of all, the first lesson I take from this, Steve, is do not believe the pollsters. They were off by 25%, which is not a small margin of error, frankly. So the armchair experts should take comfort everywhere, frankly. Why did we get this stunning result? The center held in Israel, contrary to everybody's predictions. And it's actually quite interesting because around the world, and we're going to go around the world, we see increasingly polarized politics where the center is really having trouble as the right and the left define themselves with greater vigor. In Israel, the reverse happened. And it happened in part, I think, because this was the first election where domestic issues trumped security.
That's very unusual for Israel. Domestic issues could possibly be more important than the fear of Iran dropping a bomb on Israel?
You know, it is stunning, but yes, they were. These were the issues that took hundreds of thousands of Israelis into the streets of Tel Aviv a year ago. What are the issues? The cost of housing. Young people want to get married and can't afford a house in the urban areas reasonably close to their work. Another polarizing issue in Israel right now is the ultra-Orthodox community growing in size. Numbers vary, but certainly 20% at least. Their young men do not serve in the army. And more than that, their families depend on state subsidies because they don't work. They study sacred texts year after year after year. Outrage now among the general population who are saying we are tired of supporting this and the military burden has to be borne more equally. That is just a lightning rod among the general public.
So is it likely going forward that original, I guess that original deal goes back to David Ben-Gurion, right? The first prime minister who said the religious people support me and I'll make sure you don't have to serve.
And when he did it with 700 young men, now it's anywhere between 30 and 40,000.
Okay, so is that going to change, and will they have to serve in the military going forward?
That's probably when we think about the different combinations of coalitions that Netanyahu could now put together. And, you know, again, if you read the Israeli press, they're just full of every conceivable combination. But one big picture combination is that center party led by Yair Lapid.
Yeah, it's called Yesh Atid.
There is a future.
There is a future.
There is a future. That's what that means. And he has 19 seats in the Knesset, so just under a sixth of the seats. And a core piece for him is end the unfairness of this arrangement. He campaigned as a center secularist that is determined to address this. On the far right, interestingly enough, Naftali, who is a Russian Jew. And
Naftali Bennett.
Naftali Bennett is his name, and he is a Russian Jew, but even though he has mobilized the voters who often voted for religious parties, this was a big one for him too. So it's not impossible to see a coalition coming together around this issue. There is a commission that has recommended that there be a gradual process of engaging Orthodox young men in military service or alternative service. I think that will change.
We should just take a second here, Janice, to explain this, because on election night in Canada, 99% of the time, if polls close at 9 o'clock, we know by 10 who's going to be the government.
Right.
In Israel, they have an election. It can take weeks to find out. Months. Okay, right. What process happens now?
So why is this? Because Israel has the purest form of democracy. Of course, that's why it doesn't work, because it's the purest form of democracy. There is a threshold of about 2% in order to get into parliament, and you never vote for a candidate, Steve, you vote for a party. So the Knesset members are on lists, and they represent the proportion of the population that voted for that list.
So if you get 15% of the vote,
you get 15% of the seats, roughly. Nobody ever gets 51%.
Right.
So the party with the largest plurality, which in this case is still Netanyahu, allied with another party, he merged his party, he needs to form a coalition in order to control 61 or 62 or more seats.
So coalition may be a dirty word here, but over there they do it all the time.
That's all there is.
That's all they do.
That's all. Now, as a coalition builder, you have two ways you can turn. You can turn to your left, which in his case would mean the center, or you can turn to the right. He's already indicated the night of the election, he picked up the phone and phoned Yair Lapid, the head of this new party, and said there are great things we can do for this country together.
What did Yair say?
He was non-committal because there's going to be some very tough bargaining. And the way this works, they negotiate. They each appoint negotiators. They negotiate, and they come to a coalition agreement, Steve, which actually indicates hardcore policy positions that they agree to. So it can take weeks and weeks and sometimes months before a new government is formed.
So it works, help us out here, something like, okay, I'll join your coalition if I get 5 seats in your cabinet, something like that?
No, it's more than that. Okay, I'll join your coalition if I get 5 seats in your cabinet. And if you agree that on the following 4 issues, you will do the following. So on the military draft, I'll only join your coalition if you remove the exemption entirely for Orthodox Jewish young men.
But then you can say farewell to the 12 seats on the far ultra-Orthodox right?
That's right.
Because they'll never go for that.
They're not very happy about that. So Netanyahu actually has an interesting decision to make now. Does he go, in fact, for the center, possibly with Naftali Bennett's party on the right, and leave out the traditional religious party, in this case, Shas, who represents Jews of Sephardi descent in Israel.
And who have supported him in the past.
And who have supported him in the past. That's one possibility. That would be a stunning blow, by the way, for Shas, who only bargains on religious subsidies to schools, clinics. These are hardcore exchange of interest arrangements that it's always insisted on. Unpredictable, yeah, we really don't know.
I appreciate that you say this election was more about domestic than foreign issues, but having said that, surely at some point in the campaign, what to do about Iran, what to do about the Palestinian question came up?
It's really, you know, it was a most remarkable campaign. The head of the Labour Party, the founding party, in Israel.
Who got nothing, right? Almost nothing.
She got fewer seats than about 12 or 13. I can't remember exactly which it is. So that's not almost. But certainly she did better because it wasn't trouble before. She campaigned on no discussion of the Palestinian issue. I will only talk about social issues, she said. So she literally campaigned on shelving that issue.
So Israel is looking inward.
Inward, exactly. There were Tzipi Livni, who founded the new party Hatnuah and got 3 or 4 seats. She's the only one who campaigned on reopening negotiations with the Palestinians. Netanyahu tried to campaign on an overwhelming security threat from Iran in the hope that this would mobilize voters. And in the last frantic, they were getting exit polls, and it was clear that the results were going to fall far short of expectations. So he went on the air on election day and used social media and urged people to come to the defense of the state as it was threatened. Similar kind of statements Sunday morning. Israeli voters aren't buying.
Okay, last question on Israel before we move on. Netanyahu used to win elections with much higher individual seat counts.
Yes.
He's now trying to put a coalition together where his chunk of that coalition is a lot smaller.
Right.
Does that mean he is somehow hamstrung as a leader?
Yeah.
It does, eh?
Yeah.
So he has less clout.
He certainly does. It means that he is weakened as a leader.
But he's still going to be prime minister.
Still going to be prime minister, and prime ministers are always prime, first among equals. But this is not the same Netanyahu of the last 4.5 years. This is a weakened prime minister who faces a strengthened president of the United States. Between those two gentlemen, there is no love lost.
Okay, moving on to our second I. This is the I for Iran.
Wow.
Elections scheduled for this summer. They're supposed to be replacing the president, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Who's running?
Not clear yet who's running, and the reason is, but there's a lot of speculation in the press, and we'll come to that in a minute. But why isn't it clear who's running? Because there is a council of guardians, 12 religious authorities who must approve every candidate who runs for parliament and every candidate who runs for the presidency. So they have a veto power. And what Ayatollah Khamenei has already made clear is that the so-called reformist candidates who were allowed to run the last time, green leaders, will absolutely not be on the ballot this time.
Is there a religious test you have to meet in order to be approved by this council?
They would argue yes, and I would argue no, that is not exactly the criteria. Although Khamenei and Ahmadinejad, the current president, have had a terrible falling out, and Khamenei has actually accused Ahmadinejad of misinterpreting the role of religion. So the argument gets framed in religious terms, but I think it is a vicious fight between the president and the supreme leader. Ahmadinejad will not give up. He actually is promoting his chief of staff, Mashhad, as a candidate. I think that's, I hate to say 100%, but it is so unlikely because Khamenei certainly would not tolerate that. So who might it be? And we won't know until the Council of Guardians tells us. But it might be the Speaker of Parliament, Larijani. It might be the former Foreign Minister, Velyati. It might be the current mayor of Tehran. These are all men who are loyal to Khamenei and who have aligned with Khamenei against Ahmadinejad.
Would a woman be allowed to run for that job?
I think it would be absolutely inconceivable.
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 I guess the other thing people are looking for is to see whether or not whoever succeeds Ahmadinejad might be, you don't want to say more Western in orientation, but perhaps less bellicose towards the West. What do you think?
Again, looking at how the political forces are aligned right now in Tehran, we have the ex-presidents like Rafsanjani making a fight to the death now over this issue. Khamenei certainly controls the lever of power. He controls Basij, the militia that went out into the streets in 2009. He controls the Revolutionary Guard, Steve. It's inconceivable, frankly, that somebody who Khamenei does not approve of will run. So there may be 2 or 3 candidates running, but they're all going to be people that Khamenei runs. And given that, we may get somebody who's more worldly than Ahmadinejad. Larijani, the speaker, Velyati, these are all people who have had broader experience in the world, are better attuned, their ear is better attuned to what you say and what you don't, but these are going to be hardcore Khamenei supporters.
But having said that, Ahmadinejad was widely perceed, I think, in the West to be a fool. You know, he said silly things from time to time.
I was going to say when he came to power after he was mayor of Tehran, he really brought 2 assets. He was a populist. He was a successful mayor. He was interested in local issues, and he was perceived as loyal to Khamenei. So the split actually happened as he proceeded in his presidency, but he was not somebody who had a great deal of experience outside of Iran, and many of the things he said, which he believes, which are so offensive outside of Iran.
Holocaust denial and so on.
Holocaust denial and language that frankly no seasoned politician would really use. That's not likely to happen if you get somebody like the Speaker of Parliament or the former Foreign Minister, particularly the Foreign Minister, Velyati, who traveled abroad and in much more polished veneer and sophisticated. Do the fundamental politics change? No, they do not.
Okay, but you know they're sitting around in the State Department in the United States thinking which one of these guys would be better for us and who can we, to use Margaret Thatcher's line about Gorbachev, who can we do business with? What does the State Department do? Do they try to influence this election at all?
I think the levers that the United States has are so few, Steve. I think the risks of any apparent U.S. involvement aren't so great. It's really interesting. There was just this past week, Rafsanjani and some of his allies asked for free elections, whereupon Khamenei exploded, said free elections is a code word for slander of Iran led by the United States and Israel, the Zionists. He actually doesn't say Israel, he says the Zionists. And so any attempt to intervene overtly or covertly would backfire against any candidate. The State Department has to sit back, await the outcome, and hope they get somebody relatively experienced in negotiation. That's the best outcome that we could hope for.
Does it matter in terms of Iran's nuclear program moving forward who wins?
I think it does. Somebody like Laranjani and his brother, Laranjani is the Speaker of Parliament. His brother was at times the chief negotiator on the nuclear issue. My sense is there is growing pressure inside Iran. The sanctions are biting, and Khamenei himself has said that nuclear weapons are haram, unacceptable, immoral, evil. So it's not beyond the realm of possibility that some deal can be reached in which the enrichment process is open to international inspection. There's a ceiling on the enrichment process. That's certainly possible, but that's going to take experienced negotiators who can find the sweet spot. And that's the hope in this election. But we have to wait for the Council of Guardians to tell us what we can think, Steve.
You think we need one of those Council of Guardians here in Canada or Ontario? You're not a fan, I can tell.
No.
Let's do our third eye. This is Italy, obviously with a massive economic partner in the economic union, the European Union, and whose economy is in really quite problematic condition right now. What are the main issues facing this campaign?
It's the election in Italy, like the election in Germany, in Europe, only one big overriding issue. Is austerity the way to go? Will austerity, in fact, allow the Italian economy, which traditionally has a period, has a history of kicking it down the road, kicking it down the road, kicking it down the road, and worrying about tomorrow, which gives a very high quality of life in Italy, let me tell you.
Domani, signora.
That's exactly right. Yep. But when you run the size of debt that the Italians are now running, you eventually run out of time. The big issue there is austerity. And there's a really fierce debate inside Italy right now, Steve, as there is inside Germany, as there is inside Greece, Spain. It's fundamentally the same thread running through all the politics in Europe right now. Does austerity so depress growth that it actually pushes an economy deeper and deeper into a spiral from which it cannot dig itself out?
It comes a self-defeating principle.
Exactly. So how are the parties lined up on this? Mario Monti, who was the previous premier, who came in as a technocrat, actually put some discipline into the system, delivered results, and allowed the Northern Europeans to breathe a sigh of relief that there was some discipline here. Refused to run originally, but then said, yes, I will run if I am drafted. So there is a coalition of parties who have lined up behind Monti, even though Mario Monti has not yet said he's running. To the left, but still in what we would call center-left, is a coalition of parties who have about 35% of the vote. And then, almost stunning resurrection, which defies political logic. He's back. Berlusconi is running again, and he's running in second place. You cannot count this man out.
I need to understand this, though. How is it? This guy's been convicted. This guy's been involved in sex scandals. This guy has his bunga bunga parties. This guy is the richest man in Italy. This guy controls all the media.
All the media. All the media, which is, in any other country, if you were running for public office and you controlled all the media, you would have to divest yourself of everything in a blind trust.
But how is he not seen by the Italian electorate as a laughingstock at this point?
Well, we could get into culture here, but we're probably better off not to do that. But I do think what you're getting in Berlusconi is this fury, to some degree, among the public who say, You know, austerity is the result, and it's ironic because there was nobody who was more tarnished by corruption than Berlusconi himself over the last several years. But the general sense is that austerity is the result of the corruption of senior officials who made sweet deals for themselves and lived the high life. Why should we pay for this? And so the notion that Mario Monti speaks to, which is disciplined sacrifice, is not something, frankly, that 85% of the Italian electorate is buying. So the choice, again, comes to these polarized politics, left-right politics, where in Italy the center is not holding.
Let me get one more word on Mario Monti, because he was this guy who was brought in for partisan politics was considered so broken there. They asked this guy to come in from outside, who was not affiliated with the party. Come in, be the prime minister, fix this, and then we'll see what happens. And he has, you say he has made some progress.
Yes.
Then why aren't his poll numbers higher?
Again, that's because what's his message? His message, and you know, this is the issue in Canada too, to some degree, as some of our big provinces run big deficits. His message is discipline, sacrifice, tighten the belt, cut public salaries, cut the size of the public service.
Simpler workplace rules too?
Workplace rules, open.
Anti-union?
To some degree, yes. It's never described as anti-union. What it's described as, make the labor markets more flexible.
More flexible, okay.
Right? All that message, which Angela Merkel has consistently given in Germany, well, Germans react one way, Italians react quite differently.
You know what? We got a few minutes left here, so let me cheat a little bit. I know we said 3 I's, but let's, since you brought up Angela Merkel, let's do a G as well for Germany, because they're having elections as well.
They are.
What's her status right now?
Well, it's interesting, Steve. She's in trouble. The way the bellwethers for the national government, the federal government in Germany, is to watch what is happening in state elections. There have been 4 in the last 2 years. The Christian Democrats and the Free Democrats, her coalition partner.
That's her.
Yes, that's Angela Merkel. The Christian Democrats in coalition, because Germany has coalitions too, and her junior coalition partner, the Free Democrats, have lost all of them. And in the last state election, the Free Democrats did not get the minimum vote they need even to get into the state legislature. That's got to be of deep, deep concern to her as she looks at general elections later this year. And so when we see Angela Merkel digging in her heels at European Union meetings, refusing to really allow Eurobonds to do what they need to do, refusing to allow Spain, Portugal, Italy to get loans at concessionary rates, she is turning, she's looking over her shoulder, and she's seeing a German electorate that is saying again and again, we actually did make these sacrifices, and they did. They, more than any other country in Europe, did. We made these sacrifices, and now you're asking us to be the guarantors of last resort for the European countries, particularly in the South. They talk about Southern Europeans when they're polite, the Germans. When they're not polite, they use other words. Why should we do that? What they miss in the argument, and what Angela Merkel doesn't talk about, is German banks are the lenders in all these cases. And if any of these economies run into stiff headwinds, German banks are going to feel it first.
So in our last minute here then, is the assumption that because all of the political winds appear to be blowing against her party right now at the state level, they will sweep her out as well?
That's a real possibility. It's a real possibility. Now, she's a master politician. She's proven it time and time again, but she's got a very tough fight on her hands. And for us in Canada, if there is one European leader, one that is engaged with our own Prime Minister and pushed the free trade agenda, which is right now top of mind for our government, and 2, if there's one European leader that shapes Europe right now, it's Angela Merkel. That's the one to watch.
I mean, in some respects, it's hard to imagine the EU without her. She has been at the center of absolutely everything for years.
Absolutely.
And that's a possibility, you say?
That's a real possibility.
And if she ends up losing, who's the likely inheritor of that throne?
It would be the Social Democrats in Germany. No, just to finish, there have been coalitions in Germany between the Christian Democrats and a party to the right, between the Social Democrats and the party to the left, the Greens.
The Greens, right.
But the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats have gotten together too to form national coalitions at different times. Any and all combinations are possible.
Your job is fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
It's great to look at the world.
It is.
Right. Janice Stein, as always, great to have you back here in the studio.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.